Hey guys, so welcome back to another episode of Boss Up Hustler Podcast. My name is Naraya. I am the host of this channel, and on this channel, we just talk about, basically becoming the better versions of ourselves. And really, the main idea of this channel is to help you birth out whatever dream and vision that God is giving you. My main thing and the main reason why I'm here is to help you birth out those visions, but through intentional partnership with God. So if you're new here, what's up? Hey, please don't forget to subscribe and then also check out some of the other videos that we've done. But today I just want to go and just have a conversation with you guys about some of the mental roadblocks that come up when it's time for us to birth out our dreams and our visions. So when we are really trying to chase our dreams, sometimes mentally there's certain things that come up that we feel like can hinder us from becoming or achieving those goals. One of the things that I want to talk about today is flaws, imperfections, things of that nature. So many of us have flaws, we have imperfections, and a lot of times we allow those things to define us, not only us, but also define our potential and our destinies. But let me first start by talking about what a flaw is. So a flaw is basically an imperfection. It's anything that you feel like is negative and it's a hindrance to your growth. It's a hindrance to your basically flourishment in life. You can think of a flaw as, like, let's say for example you have a blemish on your face. Let's say you have like a blemish on your face, right? So we think a lot of times we look at flaws as being blemishes, things that are kind of annoying, things that we deem to kind of just be in the way. And some of the flaws and hindrances that I think a lot of us encounter, is we look at, let's say for example, our background, right? So we will look at maybe our social status. So there are some people who came from the hood, who are still in the hood or came from the streets, and they look at their, social background. They're like, well, how can I reach these dreams? How can I become this when all I've ever known is the streets? Um, I've only been on the streets and I've never seen nothing beyond the streets. Another thing too is, depending on what society you're in, is race. If you are part of a racial status or a racial community that is marginalized, you may feel like, for example, just being black, how can you reach some of the highest, mountaintops that you want to get to when maybe your race is an issue to certain people or certain communities or to a certain society? Another thing is maybe a behavioral flaw. So let's say maybe you are an individual who might have autism. Maybe you have Down syndrome. Maybe you have a speech impairment. Maybe you stutter, right? Um, that's one of the flaws. Another one is like a physical flaw. Maybe you don't fit society's standard of what beauty is. Maybe you might have scars on your face. Maybe you may not have the ideal or perfect face that society says is beautiful. Another one that I did want to mention as well, gender, right? So depending on what society you live in, maybe being a woman, you feel like is a hindrance to becoming and birthing out that dream and that vision. And then lastly is background, again, like your education. Maybe you might have a limited education. Maybe they don't have the highest education that maybe some of your counterparts may have. Maybe you didn't finish high school. Maybe you didn't finish college. Um, these are some of the flaws that I want to talk about in the next video, in the next coming videos, just to kind of break this idea that if you have flaws, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't become great. I think that we allow those flaws to limit us and we give it so much power because, let's keep it real, society makes us feel like that, right? Our culture unfortunately makes us feel like when we have some of these flaws that it's our identity, that we can't overcome it, we can't surpass it, and we can't become great. But that's not true. So the first person that I want to talk about to show you that that's not true is going to be Moses. So if we go to Exodus 4 and 10, but let me just give you a background of Moses. So basically, there's this group of people who is being oppressed by a certain king in the Bible. So the president is jealous of these certain group of people. And because he's jealous of them and he's kind of intimidated by them, he ends up putting them in slavery. So for X amount of years, they were in slavery. And God is looking and he's like, okay, it's time for me to do something. They got to come out of slavery. So he calls Moses to do it. This guy named Moses. And where we're picking up the story is God is having a conversation with him. And Moses is basically telling him, that he can't do it, right? So because God is saying, like, I need you to go to the king, go and confront the president, tell him he's wrong, and that he needs to let my people go. Basically, get them out of slavery, undo the chains of slavery. And so where we pick it up is where Moses begins to say, he said, "Oh my Lord, I'm not eloquent." So I'm reading from New King James Version. He said, "Neither before nor since you've spoken to your servant." When he means by he's not eloquent, basically what he's saying is he feels like he wasn't good enough. Like, who am I to go to a president, to go and confront a president? I'm a normal average citizen. Who am I to go and talk to a president and go and not even talk to him, go and confront him? Then he says, but I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. So a lot of people say that Moses he probably had a speech impairment issue. So he probably maybe stuttered a little bit or just was not really good at articulating himself. Um, but when we read the entirety of Moses' story and what God was able to do with him, we realize that Moses became a prolific leader, right? So by the time he has his showdown with the president, he ends up winning the battle. And then not only does he win the battle with the president, he ends up leading the people out of slavery. So if you want to think of a modern day Moses, think of Harriet Tubman, right? Harriet Tubman was kind of like a Moses. Harriet Tubman was an individual. She was a black slave and she ran away from slavery. And basically her running away is what formed the Underground Railroad. And she was able to pull so many black people from slavery into freedom. So Moses was basically like your modern day Harriet Tubman. He became a prolific leader and was still able to be used by God, even though he had these flaws. And another thing that I also want to mention too is even though Moses did have that speech impairment issue, it didn't disqualify him from being valuable to the society because only Moses could have did what Moses did. Nobody else could have did what Moses did. It was so I don't want us to continue to look at people who have imperfections and flaws and begin to discredit them or deem them as unworthy, deem them as unvaluable because they're not, right? Like they're not. Just like you aren't, they aren't either. And then I'm gonna take it to like a modern day example too. So I'm pretty sure y'all have heard of Kendrick Lamar, just depending on where you're watching me from. But here in America, Kendrick Lamar is a household name. But when I was doing research on his background, so Kendrick Lamar actually, when he was younger, had a speech impairment, so he used to stutter a lot. And when you looked at his story, he said basically that when he had this issue, he would turn to music. So he would write music. And so music was basically his outlet for how he was able to vocalize his thoughts because, speech, just speaking was an issue for him. So when he wrote music, he was able to kind of vocalize it a little bit better. And so I want you to look at that in its entirety, right? How did this kid who had a speech issue, who grew up in poverty, he grew up in lack. How does this person who grew up in lack, who grew up in with these flaws, he's now a household name. This man is a multimillionaire. Everybody knows him, and many people will consider him to be one of the greatest rappers to ever have done it. So again, it's just to hone in this idea that you having flaws, you having imperfections does not define you, nor does it mean that you can't and won't become somebody great. You can, because with God, all things are possible. Kendrick Lamar, despite his background, he still is somebody great to this day. And so the last thing that I want to mention is going to be physical flaws, right? So if you go on social media or just if you live in pop culture, it's very subtle, but it's very clear. Society has their own ideas of the perfect standard of beauty, how she looks, her color skin, her hair texture, her facial features, how her body is shaped. Society already has all that planned out. But what happens for the woman or for the girl who may not fit into that mold, get to become somebody great because she doesn't fit, the standard of beauty? Because another message that you will look at and you'll see is that a lot of times there's this such thing as pretty girl advantage, right? So pretty girls are glorified, and even if you look at certain movies, they'll show you that they get access to rooms that maybe somebody else didn't get access to rooms. They'll have certain advantages that maybe somebody else who didn't fit that standard, they don't get. But we have to start challenging that. What happens to the woman or to the girl that doesn't fit that? What if the girl or what if the woman has a facial flaw? What if she has scars all over her face? What if she's cross-eyed? What if she had facial surgery, facial reconstruction, and now her face has blemishes on it? Does she still not get to sit at the table? Does she still not get to become great? Let's see. So I'm going to take you to a story with Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. So you can find it in Genesis 29. And I'm going to just give you just a quick background on Jacob. So Jacob is basically a man. He's basically looking for a wife. And he finds this person. His name is Laban. And Laban has two daughters. He has a daughter named Rachel. He has a daughter named Leah. So I'm looking at Genesis 29 and 16. And it says, now Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder, in other words, the older daughter was named Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful, form, and appearance. Leah probably wasn't, compared to Rachel, she probably wasn't the most prettiest compared to Rachel, right? So the Bible says that Rachel had a bomb body, right? She just had a pretty face and she just had a pretty body. But the Bible also says that Leah was delicate in eyes. So sometimes people have said that Leah might have been like cross-eyed, or she might have just had like maybe a weak eye. So her eye might have drooped a little bit. Like she just didn't fit that ideal standard of beauty. But when we look at the totality of Leah's story and where God ended up leaving Leah, we learn that, because Jacob he wasn't really feeling Leah like that. Like Leah wasn't his girl. Okay. Laban ended up giving both of the kids to her because of his custom, but Leah wasn't really like that. And so because of that, um, God allowed and used Leah. Basically, she ended up birthing royalty. So when she had kids, her kids became very powerful, very influential in their society. And so we see how God ended up using the weakness or the imperfection as an entry point to catapult Leah into greatness. So he has so much compassion on Leah because the Bible ended up saying that Leah was kind of unloved. Like Jacob wasn't really feeling her like that. It's like he basically was able to use it to put Leah in position to reign in life and to become someone great. So from everybody that I share, Moses, Kendrick Lamar, Leah, and Rachel, my whole point of this video is I don't want us to any longer basically look at our flaws and our imperfections and continue to give it so much weight. We give it a little too much power, right? We look at our flaws and our imperfections and we disqualify ourselves. We feel like we have nothing to offer to the world. We feel like we can't become great. We can't reach those visions. And that is a lie. With God, all things are possible. We see how God used Moses. We see how God used Leah. And to be quite frank with you, we see how Kendrick Lamar, I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but we see how Kendrick Lamar was still able to overcome every negative aspect of his life and every imperfection and still become someone great. So to end this episode, I want to end it with assignment thing that I call like reframing your destiny or reframing your thoughts. So I want you to think about maybe a flaw that you feel like you have. I want you to think about it and write it down. The thought that we've always had, and the thought that now I want us to break and challenge, is that, oh, because I have X, Y, and Z flaw, I can't become someone great. I want you to reframe that. So instead of continuing to have that thought in your mind, I want you to reframe it. So an example of this looks like, let's say if your flaw is maybe you grew up in the hood, right? Maybe you are from the hood and that's just your thing, right? So you could say, poverty will no longer hinder me. And then you could put either a Bible verse there, you could say, because God said with him, all things are possible. Or if you're not a Christian, you can always put an empowering statement. So you could say, poverty is not going to hinder me any longer because I can overcome any challenge, any setback. The point of this is because we don't realize that the things that we constantly replay in our minds, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, shapes our lives. It determines where we're going to go. Your beliefs write your life. Your beliefs, what you believe about yourself, what you believe about how far you can go, that's determining your life. And I'm not talking about what you say to other people. I'm talking about what you really believe, like from the heart. So the whole point is because I'm trying to deal with the internal. What you say to other people and what you present to other people, that has no power. Is what do you believe internally? That's the driving force. So what I'm coming to deal with is what you deal with internally. So I want you to reframe whatever it is your flaw is, because it's going to reshape how you're thinking, and it's going to reshape your belief internally. That is all that I have for you guys today. I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Again, like I said, I'm going to continue to go over these flaws and these imperfections and just provide you more content on that. So just make sure you stay tuned. And like I said, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And I'll see you again next time.